The envelope wasn't the hardest thing I brought to that kitchen table. But it's the thing my daughter-in-law keeps talking about. 2 months later, as if paper were the problem, I set it down between the fruit bowl and the placemats my son had owned since university. The ones with the faded loons on them, and I folded my hands and waited. Nobody said anything for a moment. The chicken was getting cold. Let me back up, because none of this starts at that kitchen table. It starts on a Tuesday afternoon in February, the kind of February we get in Ontario where the sky is the exact same gray as the slush on the road and you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. I was at my desk at the insurance brokerage where I'd worked for 22 years. Regional manager. Not glamorous, but mine. My own parking spot, my own clients, my own reputation built over 2 decades of showing up. My son called at 2:47. I remember because I had a client meeting at 3 and I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Not because the conversation was good. Because it told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. Mom. He has this way of saying that word. Drawn out. Careful. Like he's testing the temperature of something. I've known since he was 9 years old that when he says my name like that, he wants something he already suspects I won't want to give. Do you have a few minutes? Teresa and I have been talking. Teresa is my daughter-in-law. She's 34. She works in marketing for a tech company out of Waterloo. My son, Derek, is 36. He's a project manager at a construction firm. Together they earn somewhere around $260,000 a year. I know this not because they told me, but because I helped them with the mortgage paperwork 3 years ago when they bought their house in Guelph, and I had to see the income verification. I have a few minutes, I said. What followed was 11 minutes of careful, practiced language. I could tell they'd rehearsed it. There was a rhythm to it, the kind that comes from having the same conversation several times alone before having it with someone else. Derek would say a sentence, then pause in the spot where Teresa had probably nodded or added something when they'd rehearsed it at home. The short version. They couldn't afford daycare. The long version took 11 minutes. The daycare near their house, the one they'd been on the wait list for since before the baby was born, had a spot opening in September. $1,800 a month for their son, my grandson, Pax. He'd just turned 14 months. Teresa was going back to work in the spring, and they'd been counting on that spot. But now they'd done the numbers, Derek said, and with the mortgage payment, the car payments, their student loans, groceries, utilities, $1,800 a month for childcare just wasn't workable. They'd looked at other options. Home daycares in the neighborhood were $1,200 to $1,400. A nanny would run them $3,000 minimum, more with the payroll taxes. We've been thinking, Derek said, that maybe this is actually a good time for you to think about retiring. I was quiet. You're 64, Mom. You could retire. And Pax already loves you. It would be so good for him, to have family instead of strangers, and it would give you time to slow down, to what? I said. To enjoy things. You've worked so hard. I turned my chair to face the window. Outside, a city bus was pulling away from the curb, throwing a wave of gray slush onto the sidewalk. A woman in a yellow coat jumped back just in time. Tell me more about what you're picturing, I said. What they were picturing, it turned out, was this. I would retire from my job, the job I had 6 more years left on before my own planned retirement at 70. I would drive to Guelph 3 days a week, roughly 90 minutes round trip. I would care for Pax on those days, full days, from around 7:30 in the morning until Teresa or Derek got home, usually around 5:30 or 6. On the other 2 days, Teresa's mother, Renata, would cover. Renata lives 20 minutes from their house. She's 61 and not working. That sounds very thought through, I said. We really think it could work, Derek said. I'm sure you do, I said. Let me think about it and we'll talk more soon. I hung up and sat very still for about 90 seconds. Then I opened a new spreadsheet. I want to be clear about something. I love my grandson. I love Derek, even when he disappoints me, which is more often now than it used to be. I am not a woman who withholds love, and I am not the villain of this story, though I suspect Teresa has a version where I am. But I am also a woman who has spent 22 years reading the fine print on things other people sign without reading. That skill does not turn off when I leave the office. I started keeping notes that afternoon. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched and I listened. Derek texted more than usual, which meant Teresa was prompting him. Little messages. Pax said something that sounded like Grandma today. We were looking at photos of Thanksgiving, and Pax kept pointing at you. Derek's really hoping we can figure something out together. The grammar on that last one was too neat to be Derek's. I asked questions casually over 2 phone calls. What days was Renata available? Oh, 2 days a week, Derek said. Was she being paid? Oh no, he said. She just loves spending time with Pax. I let that sit for a day. Then I called my son's wife directly, which I do rarely enough that she answered on the second ring, slightly surprised. I just want to make sure I understand the plan, I said. Renata does Thursdays and Fridays? Tuesdays and Thursdays, actually, Teresa said. And she's not being compensated. A half-second pause. She offered. She wanted to. That's generous, I said. And the other days? Well, that's what we're hoping to work out with you. Of course, I said. I'm just trying to understand the full picture. So with me doing 3 days and Renata doing 2, the daycare spot in September would go to someone else. Right, we'd take Pax off the list. Okay, I said. And if for some reason one of us couldn't make it, if I had a medical appointment or Renata had something come up, what's the backup plan? There was a longer pause this time. We'd figure it out, Teresa said. Sure, I said. That makes sense. I already knew by then that I needed to see the numbers myself. Not their numbers. All the numbers. Derek and I are close in the way that mothers and sons who have been through hard things can be close. We understand each other at a frequency that doesn't always require words, but we are also both stubborn in ways that occasionally make the air between us go still and tight. His father and I separated when Derek was 11. I raised him largely on my own through high school. I worked the whole time. I picked up night courses when I could to finish my professional designation. I drove a 2003 Civic for 9 years because it was paid off and reliable, and I needed to put money into his hockey registration and school trips instead. I say this not to collect a debt. I say it because I want you to understand. I have never once asked Derek to rescue me. I have never once called him on a Tuesday afternoon and said, I've done the math, and I think you should reorganize your life to cover my shortfall. I drove to Guelph on a Saturday in mid-March, when the snow was starting to get heavy and tired-looking, the kind of snow that knows it's almost finished but hasn't quite given up. I brought a roast. I brought wine. I brought an envelope that I tucked into my coat pocket and didn't mention until after we'd eaten. The house is beautiful. I want to give them that. They have a good eye. Teresa's mother has a good eye too. I've seen her choices in the living room, and I respect them even when I'd have chosen differently. The kitchen has those deep navy cabinets that were everywhere in design magazines a few years ago, and a long island where Pax sits in his high chair and bangs a wooden spoon while adults talk around him. He's a good baby, sturdy and loud, with Derek's ears and Teresa's intensity. He held his arms out to me when I walked in, and I held him for a long time before I put him down. We ate. It was a good meal. Derek made roasted potatoes with rosemary the way I taught him, and Teresa opened the wine, and we talked about things that weren't the thing for the entire first half of the evening. Around 8:30, Pax went to bed. Teresa made tea. And Derek looked at me with that particular expression, the one I've known for 25 years, the one that says, okay, now. So, he said, have you had a chance to think more about everything? I have, I said. I reached into my coat pocket and set the envelope on the table between the fruit bowl and the placemats with the loons. I made some notes. The envelope contained 4 pages. I'd been precise on purpose, not aggressive, not a list of grievances, just a clear-eyed accounting of the situation as I understood it. The first page was mine. My salary, $91,000 a year, not including my benefits package, which includes extended health, dental, and a pension I've been contributing to for 2 decades. If I retire now, at 64 instead of 70, I lose 6 years of pension contributions. My financial planner, who I'd consulted before driving to Guelph, Put the lifetime cost of that at somewhere between $140,000 and $180,000, depending on how long I live and what markets do. My benefits go away immediately. Replacement coverage under a retiree plan would cost me roughly $460 a month. The second page was theirs, not their personal account statements. I didn't have those, but I'm good at working from what I know. Derek had mentioned their mortgage payment once, $2,340 a month, which lines up with what they would have borrowed at the rates available when they bought. 2 car payments. I knew about Derek's truck because I'd been there when he bought it, and Teresa's lease had come up in conversation at Christmas. Together, roughly $400 a month. Their RESP contributions for PACs, they'd told me proudly they were maxing the government grant, so $2,500 a year. That's about $208 a month. Internet, utilities, insurance, groceries for 3 in Guelph, conservatively $2,200 a month. Derek's gym membership and Teresa's Peloton subscription, which she'd mentioned, another $130. That's $6,278 a month in committed expenses before they buy a coffee or put gas in either vehicle. On a take-home of roughly $15,800 a month after tax and source deductions, that leaves about $9,500 a month. $1,800 for daycare is 19% of what's left over. I'd looked up their neighborhood on a real estate site. Their house is currently listed, not for sale, just the assessment, at approximately $780,000. It has appreciated roughly $130,000 since they bought it. The third page was a question. I'd written it out by hand because I wanted it to feel like a question, not an accusation. It said, "If Renata is spending 2 days a week with PACs and is not being compensated, can you help me understand how that was determined?" I hadn't signed it. It didn't need a signature. Teresa read it first. She's a faster reader than Derek. I watched her face. She looked up at me, and her expression was the particular expression of someone who has been asked a question they prepared an answer for, but hoped wouldn't be asked directly. "She offered," Teresa said. "You mentioned that," I said. "I'm curious how the offer came about. Did she suggest it, or did you have a conversation where you asked?" "We talked about it, and she said she'd do it for free. She wanted to help." "I'm sure she did," I said. "I'm curious whether there are any other arrangements, any other help she's providing that I might not be aware of." The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape to it. Derek looked at Teresa. Teresa looked at the table. There it was. I turned to page 4. The fourth page was not something I'd planned to include until 48 hours, before I drove to Guelph, when Teresa had mentioned, in a text she'd sent to Derek, that he'd accidentally shown me while we were looking at a photo of PACs on his phone. Something about the e-transfer, going through on Friday. I'm not a person who reads other people's messages. I saw 3 words and I asked one question. What e-transfer? And Derek, who has never been a skilled liar, told me in approximately 40 seconds. Renata is being paid. Not for the 2 days of childcare. For the other thing. Teresa's parents had helped with a different kind of shortfall 6 months ago. Not childcare. Something quieter. Teresa has a line of credit she'd been carrying for several years. Debt from before she met Derek, from a period in her mid-20s when she'd been underemployed and making choices on credit that she couldn't sustain. The balance had ballooned. The interest rate on the type of credit facility she had was not forgiving. Her parents had helped her consolidate it. A family loan, low interest, structured to save her thousands in bank interest. Renata had organized it. The e-transfer that went through on Friday was Teresa's monthly repayment to her own mother. $750 a month. This is not a scandal. People help their children with debt. Parents do this all the time, and it's private and it's nobody's business. I want to be very careful to say, I do not think there is anything wrong with what Renata did. But when you are asking me to leave my job, to lose 6 years of pension, to drive 90 minutes a day 3 times a week to provide free labor, and at the same time, your mother is receiving $750 a month from your household, structured as a loan repayment, not charity. But still, when that is the situation, and you describe your mother as someone who just wanted to help and offered on her own, then the conversation we need to have is not about daycare. I set page 4 on the table. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't need to. Derek looked at it for a long time. "Mom," he said finally. "I know," I said. "I want to be honest about what happened next, because it wasn't clean and it wasn't a movie." Derek didn't apologize immediately. Teresa didn't either. What happened was closer to the particular silence of people who have been caught not in a lie exactly, but in a carefully constructed omission, which is its own kind of thing. Teresa said, "We didn't think you needed to know about that." I said, "That's interesting." Derek said, "It's not related." I said, "Isn't it?" He started to say something else and I shook my head gently because I wasn't looking for a fight. I've been in enough difficult conversations professionally to know that the moment you raise your voice, you've handed the other person a reason to focus on your tone instead of the content. I said, "I want to be clear about where I stand. I love Pax. I love you. I will be present in his life in every way that grandmothers are present. Birthdays, holidays, sick days when you're truly in a bind, summers when he's older and wants to spend time with me. I'm not going anywhere." I paused. "But I'm not retiring. And I'm not providing 3 days of free childcare every week while your household has other financial commitments that apparently take priority." "That's not what this is," Derek said. "I know you don't see it that way," I said. "But that's what the math says. And I thought the math was something we were allowed to talk about." Teresa said something sharp then. Something about how I always made everything about money. How she'd never felt welcomed in this family. How this was exactly what she'd worried about from the beginning. I let her finish. I've learned to let people finish. "I hear you," I said. "I'm sorry you've felt that way. That's genuinely not my intention." I picked up my coat from the chair where I'd set it at the beginning of the evening. "But I don't think we're going to resolve tonight everything that needs to be resolved. Let's let things settle and talk again when we've all had some time." I hugged Derek at the door. He hugged back, stiff and uncomfortable, but he hugged back. I drove home on the 401 in the dark, the road salt crunching under my tires, the radio off, the kind of quiet you choose rather than the kind that's chosen for you. A few things have happened since then. I'll tell you the ones that matter. Derek called me 10 days later. "Not with Teresa, just him," he said. "I think we handled that badly." I said, "I think a lot of things happened that probably needed to happen." He said, "I didn't know you'd see the text." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry we didn't tell you the full picture." "I didn't say you think. I didn't say you should be." I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I mean it. They found a home daycare provider, a woman named Bev, who runs a small operation out of her house 3 blocks from theirs. Licensed, CPP compliant, 3 other kids Pax's age, $1,200 a month. Less than they were catastrophizing about. They had the money. They always had the money. Renata still does her 2 days. I go on Sunday afternoons when I'm not exhausted from the week, and Pax runs to the door, and I sit on the kitchen floor, and we play with his blocks, and I stay for dinner sometimes and leave before it gets late. I did not retire. I went back to my office the Monday after that Saturday dinner, and I sat down at my desk and opened my calendar and scheduled everything I'd been meaning to schedule for months. A trip to Newfoundland in July. A long weekend in Prince Edward County with a woman from my book club who I've been meaning to travel with for 3 years, and a consultation with my financial planner to confirm that my retirement at 70 looks exactly as solid as I'd planned. Someone asked me recently whether I regretted bringing the envelope. I thought about it for a moment. The envelope wasn't the hardest thing on that table. The hardest thing was sitting with the discomfort of being loved imperfectly by someone you love imperfectly back, and choosing not to let that fact cost you everything you've built. I brought the numbers. They set the table. The meal was hard to get through, but I'm still here.